So I'm here to convince you that agreement is its own incentive. Now, we're all here because on some level, we're super excited about blockchain, right? And why is blockchain so exciting? Because it gives us three things that seemed kind of impossible 15 years ago. And the first, and the one that's gotten the most press, of course, is coin distribution. With blockchain, you can create a new virtual coin out of thin air, distribute it in such a way that there's a limited supply, but people believe it has value, right? This is a shocking, maybe not anymore, but certainly 15 years ago, who could have believed that Bitcoin could shoot up to, $60,000 at some point? Second of all, blockchain gives you the ability to have censorship-resistant transaction submission. So with apologies to our previous speaker, if you build your business on top of something like Facebook or Apple or Amazon, and you're too profitable, you run the risk that that company is going to come and say, hey, nice business you got there. How about we take a larger share of your profits or we're going to shut you down, right? And if you build on a blockchain, you know that nobody can do that to you because it's decentralized. But finally, the most exciting thing about blockchain is the fact that it provides secure, irreversible transactions, even across unknown and mutually distrustful parties. So this means that you can build, basically anyone with a text editor can build and deploy products on a blockchain that would previously have required really hard to get bespoke agreements with kind of trusted intermediaries like banks and whatever. So this has had just an enormous multiplier effect on the pace of fintech innovation. We've just seen this unbelievable amount of innovation. Now, if you're going to have a blockchain, you need it to be replicated on a whole bunch of machines run by a whole bunch of different people around the world, right? And that requires a consensus protocol for the machines all to agree on exactly what transactions have executed and in what order. And of course, consensus protocols are a long-studied problem in distributed systems, but there's a new twist when it comes to blockchain, because most blockchains use incentive-based consensus, right? So we're all familiar with the concepts of proof of work and proof of stake. What these really boil down to is the fact that we can grant virtual coins to people as a reward for doing things that make the consensus more secure and thus making everybody's transactions harder to reverse. And the reason this is so interesting is that it lets absolutely anybody who wants kind of anonymously participate in administering the blockchain. And that open membership of the administration helps to guarantee the censorship resistance, right? Because, even if there's one miner who doesn't want to publish your transaction, eventually somebody else will include that transaction. And finally, of course, the incentives for consensus are also kind of an ideal mechanism for coin distribution, right? And that's how, Bitcoin became the juggernaut that it is, for example. But what I'm going to argue today is that, incentive-based consensus is great for cryptocurrency. For many kinds of tokens, you're actually better served by something that we call proof of agreement than by either proof of work or proof of stake. And specifically, I'll argue that proof of work and proof of stake are really not what you want if you are creating what I call issuer-backed tokens. So this is any kind of token where the value of the token derives from some kind of promise that someone has made off-chain, right? So this could be a cash-backed stablecoin. It could be loyalty points. It could be tokenized securities. It could be carbon credits, things where the token itself is tied to something in the real world. And the reason incentive-based consensus is not so great for this is that you kind of have this Goldilocks problem. If your token transactions are too valuable for the underlying incentives that are securing the blockchain, then you'll have insufficient security, right? Even Ethereum, which is a super high quality blockchain, has maybe like $20 billion of ETH staked, right? So that means you could kind of mess with it starting at $10 billion worth. And if you could lever up, maybe you could borrow 10 billion ETH for a lot less collateral and so on. A few $1 billion, you could really mess with Ethereum, right? So does that mean you shouldn't use Ethereum? No. But if you're a central bank and you're thinking of building something that's going to grow to $1 trillion of stablecoin, maybe you don't want to issue that on Ethereum because the incentives won't be sufficient, right? There may be nation states that are willing to spend a few $1 billion to disrupt your economy. Another problem with this incentive-based consensus is that it fails to leverage a lot of investment that we've made in society in mechanisms for reaching human-level agreement. So these are things like the mechanisms we have for agreeing on ownership rights, for enforcing legal contracts, for regulating banks and ensuring they stay solvent and can't walk away with your money. And finally, maybe the kind of scariest thing about real-world tokens that are issued on a proof of work or proof of stake blockchain is if you issue $1 billion of stablecoins, say, and the blockchain forks, you may now face $2 billion worth of redemption requests. And obviously, you can duplicate the blockchain virtual assets. You can't duplicate the underlying dollars. So what this means is that, on some level, all blockchains actually require human agreement, right? You have to agree on what consensus protocol the blockchain's using, what the parameters are for that protocol, what transactions are valid, what the semantics of those transactions are, in order for the underlying consensus mechanism to be at all useful. So as an example, in 2016, Ethereum changed their transaction semantics to incorporate this weird one-time irregular state change that was designed to recover funds that were stolen by exploiting a bug in this contract called the DAO, right? And this could have been a disaster because not everybody agreed this was a good idea. About 15% of miners said, hey, too bad about the theft, but the rules are the rules. We should continue mining under the original rules. But fortunately, the Ethereum community handled this extremely well. And even though the sort of minority who didn't like the state change continued to mine on the original blockchain, they called that Ethereum Classic, and everyone kind of agreed that Ethereum had the new set of rules, right? And less catastrophically, more recently, the merge switched Ethereum from proof of work to proof of stake, and everybody kind of agrees that Ethereum is now proof of stake, and the old system is called Ethereum POW or ETHW. But the point is that if we didn't have human agreement on what the blockchain is, what Ethereum is, then the underlying consensus would be useless for security, right? Imagine Coinbase and Binance don't agree that the merge happened, and one of them still thinks that Ethereum is actually Ethereum POW. Then you could send a token like USDC from one exchange to the other, and that token might get lost because it gets sent on one blockchain and not on the other, right? And that would destroy credibility of the blockchain industry, and it would actually significantly hurt both companies. So there's a really strong incentive for everybody to agree on the rules and what Ethereum is, right? Even though usually that human agreement is not actually formalized, right? Another example, you could be, embracing the future and put your apartment lease on a blockchain. But if someone breaks into your apartment, you're still going to call the building manager or the police, and you're going to want everyone to agree that you're the rightful occupant of that apartment. And so that means agreeing on kind of what the blockchain is. So the point is not that this is bad to have human level agreement. The point is that sometimes you kind of need this human level agreement in order for the blockchain to be at all useful. And so given that you need sort of a higher level of human level agreement, why not use that as the basis for your consensus protocol? You can do that without kind of expanding your attack surface. And this is what we call proof of agreement, which is the approach taken by the Stellar blockchain, right? And there's one big caveat here, which is that this doesn't work if you want coin distribution, right? So we're not trying to replace Bitcoin here. What we're trying to do is provide a better alternative if you want to issue tokens that are anchored to some kind of real world asset, right? And the way this works is that basically the validators in our system are not anonymous. They're run by known organizations with a reputation. And every validator, every server that's running the software in the system is actually declares these are the organizations that I have to agree with, and I won't reach consensus unless these other people agree with me. So I have a little example on this slide where we have 3 validators at the top, V2, V3, and V4, and they all agree, say, we're not going to reach agreement unless all of us agree to the same thing, right? And you only reach consensus when everybody's been mutually satisfied. So for example, validator V1 here says, well, I won't agree to anything unless V2 and V3 do, and then that means that by the V2 and V3 are saying we won't agree to anything unless V4 does. So by the time V1 reaches consensus, you're kind of guaranteed that V4 is going to agree to the same thing. Obviously, the details of this are well outside the scope of this talk, but we published this paper in the 2019 Symposium on Operating Systems Principles. So if you're interested in the technical details, I'd refer you to that paper. You can get it at stellar.org/SOSP19. So the advantages of this approach are it's ultra low cost because there's no work to do for proof of work, and there's no staking required either. And so that means that we have really cheap transactions with very low latency, right? Another advantage is that token issuers can actually protect themselves from double redemption tax. If you want to issue $1 trillion worth of some stablecoin on Stellar, that actually makes sense to do that. The only thing is you have to run your own validator or contract with someone you really trust to run the validator. And then you tell people this stablecoin's worth $1 because I'll redeem it for $1. But when I process those redemption requests, I'm using this exact validator, V1. So if you care about the value of my token, make sure that you also agree with that token. And then the mechanism we use for this is called quorum slices. So basically you put my validator in your quorum slices and you'll be guaranteed that you'll never disagree with me. So Stellar, with this consensus protocol, this proof of agreement consensus protocol, has been in production use since 2015. Done over 5 billion operations in that time. To give you an idea, last quarter, we saw about 38 million payments on the system and about $250 million in relevant asset transaction volume. And by relevant asset, we mean assets that we believe are credibly tied to some underlying real world thing like money. And again, because there's no mining or staking or anything, the transaction fees are incredibly cheap, right? Cost less than 1/100,000th of a dollar to do most transactions on this network. And the consensus protocol runs in well under a second on average. So it just kicks off every 5 seconds to avoid growing the blockchain too quickly. But that means that the latency is kind of equivalent to what you expect for a credit card swipe. And of course, our energy consumption is extremely low because we're just not doing much work here. Stellar is also the blockchain used by MoneyGram. And so an advantage of this is if you have stablecoin on Stellar, you can actually turn it into physical cash. You can cash it out at MoneyGram locations in like 200 countries, right? To get your digital asset back into a physical asset. So there's an annual conference of all the people building on the Stellar network. It's called Meridian, taking place in a couple of weeks in Rome. And so if you're interested in attending or you just want to stream some of the talks, you can check it out at meridian.stellar.org. And if you want more information on the blockchain, you can get it from the Stellar Development Foundation's website. So that's www.stellar.org. Thank you.